Our first unit in pre-calculus is a review unit, as is typical after a long summer break, and we're starting in the appendix, so it is Unit A. Our first lesson is on inequality symbols and graphing, and I believe I will be introducing you to a new type of notation for your inequalities, and I always learned it as set notation, but the book refers to it as interval notation, so I wanted to make sure you hear both terms so that when I'm talking about set notation in class, you know what I mean. All right, so our example 1a is an inequality like you're familiar with. X is greater than 2. So we know how to graph that. We start out with a number line. And I usually put the number that we're looking at in the middle, and then I'll do a couple of numbers on either side. So you don't always have to have 0 included on your number line. I know some people, when they graph inequalities, think that 0 has to be there. For B, where we're looking at graphing around 10, 0 won't show up on my number line. So when we graph, we need to determine if we have an open or a closed circle on the number. The open circle means that the number itself is not part of the solution set. So for example, if I substituted 2 for x, is 2 greater than 2? No, that is not a true statement, so we will have an open circle on 2. And then, of course, we shade the solution set for the inequality. Well, what values are greater than 2? Obviously 3, 4, etc. So off to the right-hand side of the notes here, what I have are the steps in order to graph and then write the inequality in set notation. For the appendix unit, where it's mostly review, you may or may not need the steps, and actually after a few lessons, I leave those blank so you can fill in the steps if you choose to. When we get into some new material, more difficult material, I will start writing the steps again, and then eventually I will drop them off so that you can kind of fill in the process as I go through it. Some students really like that as a visual to see what they need to do for each type of problem. All right, so we are on step 4, which is to determine how to write it in interval or set notation. What we do when we write it in set notation is we use a parenthesis if it is not or equal to, and we use a bracket for the equal tos. So we have x is greater than 2. I'm going to use a parenthesis because 2 is not part of the solution, and we're going from 2 to infinity, everything that is greater than 2. And because infinity isn't an actual number, we always use a parenthesis next to the infinity. We will never use a bracket. All right, so let's look at example B. X is less than or equal to 10. Notice I read that backwards. Instead of 10 is greater than or equal to x. A lot of students, when the variable is on the right side of the inequality, graph it backwards because they look at the inequality symbol itself and they don't look at where the variable is in relation to the number. So in relation to 10, x is less than or equal to 10. So learn how to read inequalities carefully. Setting up our number line, I'm going to put 10 in the middle, a couple of numbers on either side. Determining if it's an open or a closed circle, is 10 greater than or equal to 10? Yes, they are equal, so that is a true statement, so I fill in the circle on 10. And again, reading it backwards, x is less than or equal to 10, so we will shade the numbers to the left of 10. Writing this in set notation, we have, now looking at the graph, because again, x is on the wrong side, so we're actually going from negative infinity up to and including 10, so that's where we'll use the bracket instead of the parenthesis to represent that 10 is included in the solution set. All right, last example on this page when we've got x in between two numbers. So let's see how that works. Starting with our number line. Now I need from -2 to 4, and depending on how far apart the numbers are, I don't get real picky if you want to kind of estimate where those numbers would be instead of showing the lines for every single integer in between the two. So we will have an open circle at -2 because that is not part of the solution, and a closed circle at 4 because that is part of the solution. And obviously x is in between, so we will shade in between the two. So for the set notation, -2 is not part of the solution, so that will be a parenthesis. And 4 is, we will use a bracket around the 4.